The question, yes, of well-being impacts our understanding of democratic competencies, and I think I wanted to talk about well-being because it's important to situate this in the wider context and not only thinking about student well-being, but teacher well-being. And I think the presentation will show how they're connected, actually, and specifically looking at online context. So the questions that we will be answering are several. What type of uncertainty are students faced with today? How do students react to present day uncertainty? What does this mean for learning in online context? And what can be done is very important with the situation to increase student and teacher well-being. The illustrations of this PowerPoint were done by our member of Learn to Change, Laureen Golden. I didn't present Learn to Change. I think a lot of people know the NGO. It's an NGO that is based, is focused on democracy in education and does training and different materials for teachers and students. So we are here in a year of great uncertainty. Uncertainty has been here for a while. We were already talking about how our world was changing, etc., before, but I think we have come to a space now where this uncertainty has attained a certain level that produces effects that are not always very helpful for young people, and especially we have seen in the field of education that it has been extremely impactful. For example, today the number of patients in psychiatry between the age of 20 and 30 has doubled since the lockdown in 2020. So here we have really statistics that show us that there is suffering out there. And as educators, we have the responsibility to interest ourselves in this issue. Youth are missing essential elements and resources that help them to develop today. They're stunted in their professional construction. How can they project themselves? In their capacity to see their future and project themselves in this future. They're lacking social interaction, and they're experiencing changing learning environments. Also, their freedoms are becoming scarce. So in the context of the pandemic, for example, although the most vulnerable medically wise are the elderly people, it is the youth that is most impacted while they are the least fragile. This is a very, very unusual situation. So it's a generational disaster in the making because we're breaking the construction of a whole generation and the confidence in life of youth from this entire generation. We have to think as educators what does this mean for society and how we can react to that. So the question of mental health and troubles with student well-being is noteworthy. Some may say, it's only 1 year. What is this going to do on the long run? Yes, but a year for a young person is not the same as a year for an older person. That's the first thing. And also, as we see this happening, we see that the most fragile, and this is a very important issue in terms of democracy and education, the most fragile are impacted first. The fragile youth, the kids who were anxious, maybe isolated, fearing failure, have now a lower self-confidence and they tend to fall off the cliff. They can drop into anxiety and depression. And those who were solid before, who were in favorable conditions for their construction, they probably can plow through what's happening now with less visible short-term impact, but still, I put the question of what is the long-term impact. Youth gain and integrate self-confidence from relationships, from experiences and opportunities that are lacking for them today. So mental health is related to developmental issues that concern all ages in different ways. For me, when I see this young person in front, she looks like she's 4 years old in front of the computer, 4 or 5, I'm thinking, is this what she should be experiencing at that age? Because from 4 to 5, we learn to speak. We recognize our emotions. We do very important developmental things. For older youth, neuroplasticity is key, for example. Our brain develops until the age of 25. So we're thinking of how psychology of learning will help us understand the meaning and the specific windows of development that we have and how they're being impacted today. If these brains, for example, are getting scarred by their experiences or their lack of opportunities for experiences, it's going to impact the natural growth. And stunted growth is what we may observe. So there are different possible reactions to overwhelm and uncertainty. We need to know that the fear of the unknown is possibly the most fundamental fear of human beings. From an evolutionary perspective, for example, humans have been able to survive because they were able to plan. We're socialized from childhood to believe that there's a predictable universe out there and an order in which things should happen. Our brain doesn't like uncertainty. It is very binary. It works in yes, no, good, bad, security, not security. We're bombarded with uncertainty today. And so we ask ourselves, youth can ask themselves questions such as, if I go see my grandmother, will she be safe? Can I finish my studies? Is my diploma going to be worthless? Or am I still able to meet someone that I can love? These are important life questions. And the psychology of uncertainty teaches us that uncertainty can cause tremendous anxiety because the brain is constantly updating the information about the world and making judgments about what's safe and what's not. So first, due to its disdain for uncertainty, it makes up all sorts of stories hundreds of times a day. Many of them are unverified because for the mind, uncertainty equals danger. And if our brain doesn't know what's around the corner, it can't keep us out of harm's way. This also means that we cannot learn as well as we used to. Secondly, our brain also tends to assume the worst. It over-personalizes threats and jumps to conclusions. It will do almost anything for the sake of certainty. Third, we are hardwired to overestimate threats and underestimate our ability to handle these threats. And there are these three mechanisms of the brain, in the name of survival, are an attempt to spur us to action and to get us ready to safety. So it can be lived as a torture. Certain uncertainty can be lived as a torture. And the brain prefers, for example, a negative outcome rather than not knowing. Scientists have shown, for example, that we prefer to lose our job than to not know what's going to happen with our job later. So in all cases, we prefer to know rather than not to know. This means we have an intolerance to uncertainty. And today for youth, when we're faced with uncertainty that is overwhelming, uncertainty and complexity that they cannot cope with, it may create a aversion to uncertainty or intolerance. And this has been modelized in psychology. When we're confronted with uncertainty, we can react in two ways mainly. Either we augment our tolerance to this uncertainty or we diminish the uncertainty. The way we do this is, for example, if I want to augment my tolerance to uncertainty, it's a very liberating work, but it is hard work and it needs to be accompanied, and not all can have access to it. I think that teachers have the possibility to help youth with this augmentation of their tolerance of uncertainty. There are things that we can do for that. Diminishing uncertainty in our everyday living produces some results that might be very problematic. For example, one way of diminishing uncertainty is to stop. I do nothing. To be sure, I don't contaminate, I don't see anyone. I have the fear of failing. Well, to be sure I don't fail, I stop before trying. I do nothing. This way, inhibition, avoidance, and anxiety are the problem that we should look at. There's also revolt or acceptance, and sometimes there's both. Youth need to revolt. It's part of their identity construction. Revolt is understandable since what's happening today goes beyond the acceptable for us and for them. So facing uncertainty, there can be some reactions. We have resignation or indignation. What is best? We can't say that. It depends because society needs all kinds of people, and whether I react with resignation or indignation, it will produce different results. If I choose, and it's not a matter of choice, if my reaction is anger, frustration, indignation, these are good starters, but they might not lead to constructive responses. For those who accept, on the other hand, who are calm and who don't get angry, but who are looking for solutions, it's also necessary and useful that we have both types of persons. Some people need to be able to react, to get angry. They do the job of alerting us, for example. Um, they associate with others to that are more peaceful, perhaps, but help them move to action. Accepting, for example, is not suffering or being submitted, nor does it mean to stay passive. It's about saying, all right, today it's raining. I wanted it to be a nice sunny day. It's not, and now what can I do with that? So acceptation can be an appeasement on the inside to better move to action on the outside. And these skills of acceptation are precious today. I'm calling them skills and not competencies because they are composite. They are comprised of many different elements that you find, for example, in your tools. But the way we're looking at it is less in terms of simple citizenship, but is well-being towards the possibility for action. So what is helping possible citizenship behind this? So what do youth need for their well-being? That is amiss. And mostly thinking, what is it in their life today that they can keep to help? They need action and relationships. First of all, action. We need to socialize to be well. And our question today is, I'm hearing the translation suddenly. Okay. Um, and we need relationships that are vital because we cannot live isolated. So when we're in depression and anxiety, we think efforts aren't worth it. It won't change. So taking it very seriously for an educator is important to find the creativity to address these issues. We need action and relationships, as I said, and also in the things that we're allowed to do, there are certain things that are more nourishing than others. We know that physical activity has been drastically reduced for kids, but it's so important for their well-being. We know that reading is also important because it allows us to go into new worlds and develop our empathy and understand things differently. So these are things that's still there. And also there's this small group of 3 people. If we can't have the large scale sociabilities that we had, we can still think of small scale sociabilities that are still possible. For example, creating bubbles. If I have 1 or 2 friends and we are all careful together, then I have a sociability bubble that I can depend on. Let's look at teachers now. How are teachers doing these days? From our network in Learn to Change, I can see that we have a lot of feedback from the field and teachers are having a very hard time. They also are having to face uncertainty and they have the same mechanisms that I described for youth. These are mechanisms that we keep even as adults. And so we want to look at how they're reacting to this challenge and also what it means for the teaching and learning in these contexts that they're doing it in now, which is online context mostly. And look at a few things that we can do to help each other. So looking at the wide array of what we're hearing, we see that some teachers shine, actually. They are interested by the challenge. They manage to get their teaching online. They're quite happy, and some are managing well. But most are either swinging between not managing well and managing well, or in some are really struggling. And we know that in the field, some teachers are giving up. I was looking, let's go back also. I was looking for those numbers. I wanted to know how many teachers had been contaminated during the COVID pandemic up to now. And it was impossible to find this number. But looking also at what we're hearing from the field, it is happening out there. So there's the health issue itself is important. Here is a word cloud of different things that we are hearing about from the field. So there's this challenge that they're facing is infection itself, having to go to repeated quarantines after being contaminated over and over as soon as the class restarts. There's also overwhelm with the amount of preparation that is needed for online teaching. Lots of time invested in learning to handle new platforms, new tools, applications with insurmountable technical obstacles for some, and methods that don't work as they used to, tools that don't work. Also, new ways of tackling classroom management is something that is interesting. Teachers are talking a lot about motivation, and wanting to motivate and engage students is an issue. The loss of real social contacts with colleagues is extremely impacting also. There's a lack of possibilities of recharging your batteries by talking to colleagues in the staff room, which creates loneliness, anxiety, helplessness, and depression in teachers as well. They can react also by imposing or seeing what's going on with the students. Students who don't turn on their camera. This might seem a small issue that's not important. But if I don't want to show the conditions in which I'm living in my family, I might not want to open my camera. It's not because I'm being impolite. And these issues are difficult to talk about. So these are reflections that we need to have. How do we react when the students are not turning on their camera, for example? Students who turn the camera on or interact and we see that they're unwell. So it's difficult to continue your lesson as planned when you're seeing this. Students who disappear completely is a major democratic issue. Parents who are worried, parents who know better and complain. There are a lot of challenges that we're seeing right now. Online classrooms that should be democratic and inclusive are important, but how can we do that? How can we develop more cooperation and critical thinking? Now, this photo you have probably all seen. This is Joe Biden talking to his new staff. And the photo shows how important it is for us to reflect on and develop new competencies for the future, and specifically on how to be human in online spaces, how to show up as real people in digital spaces. So we need new skills for collaboration, and most importantly, I throw the word out there, it's part of my research today and the main aspect of my PhD, it's conversation. How do we learn through conversation? Because I think that conversation is one way to put the human back into the interaction. If you're constantly going through the method, the approach, the tool, etc., it might be that it's disincarnated the communication in order to reincarnate and re-embody what we're doing in digital spaces. Conversation is of the essence because this is how we appear as human. So this is a 21st century skill that we will be talking about for a long time. And our generation grew up mostly thinking that progress will save us, that things are going always better. We're progressing, progress, development is for certain. There was then a perception of linearity in our thought about the future. Tomorrow will be better than yesterday, and our thoughts about the future determine in great ways where we focus our attention in the present. So there was uncertainty and linearity that could be counted on and would not disappear and let us down. And this, for now, is gone. This means we need a new rapport to the future so that we can act on our attention and focus. Now, what is happening is that not only youth cannot have this confidence and conviction, but they have the opposite conviction that tomorrow may be worse than today. That's the previous generation were the lucky people and they got the short end of the stick. This has been the model for most Western developed countries for the past 50 years. And it's a terrible heritage that we're giving to youth today in terms of climate, economy, ecology, the battered planet, and now breaking this image of a society that we're not able to grow in is very of the essence. It needs to be understood by all stakeholders that the future management and policy related to the crisis cannot be dealt with the same ways. So the question is, what can we do better? The decisions about how to deal with the pandemic, for example, today is done by adults only. This shouldn't be the case. Society should be able to decide in the dilemma between older people and the young, between protection to live and desire to live. How can these be seen together? If and when it starts again, how can we do something different tomorrow? Students' participation in decision making is possible. It's possible not to decide these things in authoritarian ways. So taking well-being and mental health very seriously is important, including um, um, expression of youth around these issues is essential. And consulting youth in decision-making for policies related to the pandemic can help us manage the situation and determine some reasonable sociabilities. Reaching to the end now, democratic issues with online learning are many, but I have insisted on three that I present here. So the equal access that I've talked about is the most important one. Discrimination is revealed under a new light. And I've seen some teachers try to alleviate disappearing students by actually doing things that are quite innovative, actually even sometimes going and meeting the student in the street in an outside setting to be able to rein them back, sending mails, using the phone, not interacting so much in the face-to-face online, but putting a lot of stuff on a web page so that the families can manage on their own time to help students. The other issue is online behavior and the shyness of some students. It is not the same thing to take the floor in an online setting. Believing that students are capable of the best is important to deal with this issue, and slow encouragement is what seems to be working for some teachers. And assessment is a huge issue. I've seen, I think this is the most important area in which I'm seeing infringements of human rights and dignity of students. For example, proctoring, which is a very widely used, I'm going to explain it because I'm probably not, everyone knows that, but it's putting software on your computer that can spy everything you're doing. So it will say whether you're chatting on the side or whether you're on your email, etc. So proctoring is one issue that makes us think, okay, where are we at with privacy here? Why are universities or schools now thinking that they are allowed to invade students' privacy for the sake of assessment and keeping diplomas at the same level of recognition than previous year's diplomas and next year's diplomas? That's a very important question to look at, proctoring. Then overload. Over and over, we're seeing in many departments in universities, specifically a little bit less in school, but it's also true in schools and secondary schools, this overdoing by fear of underdoing as a reaction to the lack of control. Something we're seeing a lot in teachers' behaviors, and also under the pressure of the system that pushes them to try to continue as before. So these are difficult issues because the students at the other end are in this state of overwhelm that I described at the beginning, and they're being overloaded. So this is quite also a human rights issue, I think. And there are more issues around teams and groups working online, so teams of students, where you cannot control in the same way as in a face-to-face setting who's free writing, who is working with others, and how the group is actually managing in their cooperation. So this has impact also on well-being. I'm going to give a few more pieces of advice that we were given from the field and also from work that we're doing on a continuous manner with teachers since the beginning of the lockdowns. So conversation at the forefront. Start the conversation by asking what students would expect to hear and guide students in a discussion around creative work as commentary on democracy. These are some practices that we have seen are extremely useful for well-being of teachers as well as students, because we're talking about real issues that matter. On L2C's website, you will find a resource that's called Learning and Teaching in COVID-19. This is the result of a series of webinars where we were in conversation with teachers, and we tried to get the essence of the main messages of these conversations and turn them into the 5S: slow, simple, sense-making, structured, and supportive. You can find that on the website. The other issue is that I call it's recess. When we are in presence, we have coffees together, we have downtime in which we can just be there and talk to each other. These are gone. So they need to be recreated in a very intentional way. I know some teams, for example, who have a daily coffee. And when I see the well-being of the people in these teams that do this and those who do not, there is no comparison. So it's not a waste of time to spend time with your colleagues in an informal way, and also to let students have these informal times when they're online. It's a very important issue. Less is more. I already spoke about that, overload, and the question of assessment again. I'll talk about that later. And then meaning making of this time we are in and the power of conversation is absolutely essential, as well as being able to do these things outside, bringing everything outside. I've seen been sent wonderful pictures of teachers being very creative in how they do things outside. The three main messages I have are that in online settings, trust should be the default setting. Because if you do this, you're solving a lot of the issues that I described. You're solving the proctoring, you're solving the overload, you're solving a lot of things. Also, using this period as a license to change and transform practice. And then working reasonably. There is a general feeling and experience today that everyone has more work than we had before, because we are always on the computer, always joinable. And so working reasonably is a principle that we could look at. Staying connected with the colleagues, staying connected between students and reading together things that are important for us is very binding, is very creates more common experience. So the ability to use reading and conversation to connect on a deeper level is important. And for example, writing a diary to do this can be a good tool. And taking the time to taking care of yourself physically, going out for walks, etc., is what allows you to feel stronger and to deal with what is happening in a better way. So putting the human at the center will be my last message here. Some people want things back as they were when the pandemic will be over, and others want this to be a turning point so that nothing remains the same as before. Perhaps things will never be the same as before, and there's a good chance that new things will emerge. But the present situation has revealed weak spots in our democratic societies that might appear now less democratic than we thought, more egoistic, individualistic, consumerist, and the pitfalls are evident. Discrimination is revealed today under a new light. So perhaps a different restart. At the beginning, uncertainty, anxiety, and anger and frustration may all be transformed in energy, intelligence, reflection, and rethinking. I thank you very much for listening to these ideas, and I look forward to any questions or reactions that you have. And as a last point, I'm going also to announce that we finally have published the Cards for Democracy in 30 languages, 31 actually. So you see the Ukrainian version here in the blue card. You see also the green and the orange card are Hebrew and Arabic, because they are being used between communities that are in conflict. And I put the French one because I'm here right now with you. We'll be rolling these out in March. So very happy to be able to offer this for free to teachers who are interested. Thank you.